Hi, this is Remembering the Past, a show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. To introduce our subject tonight, let's go to The Tonight Show and Johnny Carson.
Will you welcome Mr. Burt Reynolds? You gonna get married again? I keep reading you're gonna get married.
Yeah.
I read those fan magazines, you know.
Fan magazines, wonderful, wonderful to read.
I read all those.
In the beauty parlor.
Yes, and I missed you Thursday.
Some lively banter between Johnny and Burt Reynolds, who died recently at the age of 82. Burt Reynolds was a cool guy. He was a movie star. He was a pretty good actor. He was a celebrity. He was a ladies' man. He was a raconteur. In the 70s, he was one of the leading box office draws in the world, and ultimately he was sort of a tragic character. By most accounts, he was a pretty good guy. Very few people had a bad word to say about him. One person did. We'll get to that in a minute. But even his girlfriends and wives didn't. Well, maybe Lonnie Anderson a little bit. He was married twice to Judy Carn, whose podcast we've done, and to Lonnie Anderson. And his girlfriends included Sally Field, Inger Stevens, and the original cougar, Dinah Shore. A person who did have a bad word to say about him, Marlon Brando. This is Marlon in the 70s on Burt Reynolds.
Burt Reynolds.
Don't say that name around me.
You not like him?
He is the epitome of something that makes me want to throw up.
He's a nice guy.
He is?
You want to come in here? No, you don't.
I don't know why I hate him.
So he is a nice guy, sort of thing.
He can't be. He's the epitome of everything that's disgusting about the thespian.
I'm siding with Burt on this one. By this time in the 70s, Marlon was acting a little funny all the time. Burt Reynolds was a big star. I think Marlon might have been a little jealous. Marlon took himself too seriously. Burt didn't take himself seriously at all. And I think in a couple of minutes you'll see why Marlon Brando didn't like Burt Reynolds, although their paths crossed metaphorically several times. Most people don't know it, but Burt was a Midwestern boy born in Lansing, Michigan, but he moved when he was a kid to Florida, and he went to Florida State, and he was actually a very good football player for a couple of years at Florida State. He was a running back for the Seminoles, but he banged up his knee after his sophomore year, and that was the end of his football career. He got into acting, and he did some television roles in the late 50s and early 60s. He called them Third Indian on the Left roles, but he was the second lead in a late 50s series named Riverboat with Darren McGavin. It wasn't very good, but it was at least watchable.
I was hoping to get us into Memphis before noon, Gray, but this mist is going to slow us down.
Well, don't take any chances. Don't risk anything.
A lot of snags in the river. I figure the overflow must have washed them out of the swamps last spring. I thought you swore off last trip, remember?
Swore off.
Getting involved with women passengers.
You think you got it all figured out?
Yeah, pretty well, yeah.
He was the half-breed blacksmith on Gunsmoke, Quint Asper, but Festus sort of took his role. The word is he got fired from Gunsmoke the same day that Clint Eastwood got fired from Rawhide. They met in the parking lot, and Burt Reynolds said to Clint Eastwood, "I don't know about you, but I'm going to try acting lessons." Around this time, he got one of his most important and under-recognized roles on a 1963 episode of Twilight Zone called The Bard. He played a diva Stanislavski actor who winds up getting punched out by William Shakespeare. But you know what Burt Reynolds was doing there? He was doing a dead-on, and I mean dead-on, impersonation of Marlon Brando.
When Rocky comes through that door...
Charlie, question.
Question, Rocky?
Yeah, I mean, what is my tertiary motivation here? I mean, like, I walk through the door, and I see her. Why?
Why what, Rocky? What's the question?
Exactly. What is the question? I mean, like any slob can walk through a door. I mean, like I do it every day. But, well, now, maybe I shouldn't walk through the door at that moment. So I gotta ask myself, would I walk through that door? It's on the basis of that answer that I find my motivation. So the question is, what's my motivation?
I'm willing to bet that Marlon Brando saw that episode at some point, and he was not the kind of guy who liked to be imitated. And I think that's where the animus started. But there's more to the Marlon Brando, Burt Reynolds story in a little while. Burt Reynolds was doing TV and nondescript movies. He had his own series, Dan August, in the early 70s, and that was really unwatchable. But not too long after that, he got the break that meant his career. In 1972, he got the second lead after John Voight as alpha male Louis Madlock in the classic movie Deliverance, based on the novel and screenplay by James Dickey.
These are the men. Nothing very unusual about them. Suburban guys like you or your neighbor. Nothing very unusual about them until they decided to spend one weekend canoeing down the Cohahuasi River. Lewis Medlock has real estate interests, talks about resettling in New Zealand or Uruguay.
Well, I've been around for about 15 years, doing the third Indian from the left, but Deliverance, I hope it's going to be my deliverance. I hope it's going to be my deliverance out of bad films.
Well, that role was his deliverance, although he still did some bad movies after that, but he became a household name. Here is director John Boorman to talk about it, and sure enough, Marlon Brando has a role in this tale.
My original cast in that role was Marlon Brando, but at that time, it was just before he played the Godfather, and the studios thought that he was absolute box office poison. So I don't think I would have persuaded Marlon Brando to go down those cataracts in a canoe. I had to drop him, and I'd always liked Burt's persona for this character, so I cast him. At that time, he was pretty much down. He made 2 or 3 poor TV shows, and he was very glad of the chance. He had this sort of macho style, but it was also self-deprecating, which modified it, and that was really the secret of his success. He made fun of himself and in his own macho posturing. He did all his own stunts. Some of these cataracts that they had to go down in the canoe, were very, very testing. But Burt was always almost reckless, really. He plunged into every scene, and he never lost his sense of humor. It was a great help. So he had a lot of scenes with John Voight, who was a very serious actor who liked to worry every scene to death, whereas Burt's attitude to a scene was, how can I get through this scene without making a fool of myself? They worked well together. They modified each other's method. When I finished the picture, Burt said to me, John, I was in this film under false pretenses. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I can't act. I was just faking it. The film was a great success, and he appeared on a lot of talk shows, and he did this naked centerfold on this woman's magazine. That made him this sort of sex symbol. He said to me, it hasn't really worked for me being a sex symbol, he said, because, women expect something really incredible, and I'm just a fumbler like everybody else.
Ah, yes, the notorious naked centerfold he did for Cosmopolitan. Here is the London-based film critic Karen Krasanovich.
I love Johnny Carson made this joke about the fact I saw an old lady holding up that Burt Reynolds centerfold to the light, trying to see through his hairy arm. I think it was a wonderful move for Cosmopolitan. I believe it sold millions of copies, and I think it made us look at men and Burt Reynolds and comedy and sexuality in a different way. Burt Reynolds was a massive star after Deliverance. For years and years, actually. He topped the box office. Sometimes there would be 4 of his films playing in any cinemas at any given moment. And he was perennially on Johnny Carson's late night show, which was America's focal point of the evening.
He said, "You want to go over the waterfall?" I said, "Of course."
You actually said, of course.
I said that, of course. Yes. I got on top of the waterfall, and they had a dam way up above the waterfall. They stopped the river, and I had a rope hanging on the rope at the top of the waterfall, waiting for the water to be released. And I was lying there, looking at the crew, and the crew were all going. He said, "Dummy."
He was always getting injured because he'd often do his own stunts. I mean, the roles that Burt Reynolds is famous for not choosing probably outdistanced the ones that he's famous for. Star Wars, James Bond, you name it. If it was great, he turned it down. Later on, particularly, he would make really interesting choices that a lot of people don't know about. For example, if you're a fan of Local Hero, he also did a film with Bill Forsythe, the director of that film, called Breaking In, and it's an amazing performance.
Here she talks about his great role in the 90s in Boogie Nights, the only time he ever got an Academy Award nomination. And she also mentions that great mustache and see that he was probably trolling Marlon Brando again.
And Burt Reynolds wasn't terribly happy about that at first. He didn't like the fact that this sleazy, porny sexiness was being played upon with a positive spin. The rumor is that he fired his agent. He didn't actually fire his agent. He had some stern words. But after getting the Golden Globe win and the Oscar nomination for that role, I think he began to see that you don't have to live the role now. And he would always say that he missed out on great roles because he was always looking for the fun of the role, not the quality of the role. The reason he started up with the mustache, and don't forget in the 70s, they were sexy. They were sexy to everybody, mustaches. But he said the reason he grew his was because Brando refused to grow one.
She mentioned that he turned down Star Wars and he turned down James Bond. He also turned down One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And returned to John Boorman here.
He just liked working, you know, and his choices weren't that great all the time, but he liked to be up there on the screen, so he was constantly being offered roles, and he didn't always recognize their worth. He'd be a good Bond, I think, because he has that wry, self-deprecating humor, which it requires.
Well, as John Boorman said, he kept working. A lot of his stuff was not very good, but occasionally he would surprise. You know, when you see the remake of The Longest Yard, you realize how good Burt Reynolds was in the original. He did a lot of this Smokey and the Bandit, Stoker Ace, Drek. Stuff was very popular, not exactly Hamlet. In that vein, he did some Cannonball Run stuff, which is notable only because he got to hang around with his main squeeze, Sally Field.
Where are we going? No, don't tell me. Let me guess. We are a bride in search of a wedding.
No.
No?
There is a wedding in search of a bride. Let me put it another way. Think of it as a wedding posse in search of a bride. Do you understand that, cowboy?
Yeah. What are you doing?
These are my shoes.
Oh, yeah.
And these are my legs.
Yeah. What are you going to do with them?
With the shoes or the legs?
Last time I saw legs like that, they had a message tied to them.
And when he was at the height of his popularity in the 80s, he actually cut a record that made the top 100. You can hear the typical Burt Reynolds sense of humor in it. I'd have given anything to know if Marlon Brando had a reaction to it.
Though your hair is all in tangles and your makeup is a mess, most of what you're drinking is spilling down your dress. And to keep from falling off your bar stool's about all that you can do. I'll make my proposition, 'cause I'm just as drunk as you. Let's do something cheap and superficial.
You know, I mentioned at the top of the program that I thought Burt Reynolds ultimately became a tragic figure. In his autobiography, he said, "No one had more fun than I did." And I'm sure that's probably true from the 50s through the 80s. But in later life, I don't think Burt Reynolds had that much fun. One of the things he said was that Cosmopolitan nude centerfold he did was a huge mistake. I think it might have kept him from getting an Oscar nomination for Deliverance. Even though in the last years of his life he was working pretty steadily on lesser projects, Burt Reynolds, the huge superstar, had money problems, he had health problems, he had women problems, he had legal problems, he had drug problems. He lost a lot of weight and didn't look good for a long time. And he was the subject of every tabloid rumor around. A lot of his friends like Dom DeLuise, Johnny Carson, Elizabeth Taylor all died years ago. And you just get the sense that for all the fun he had when he was acting in his younger years, he wanted to go out with more dignity. And I think he wanted to be a greater actor than he was, because he did have it in him. That's why I think he's sort of a tragic figure. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And as our final tribute to Burt Reynolds, we're going to close with the obvious, the theme song from Deliverance, Dueling Banjos. Every time you hear it, you think about Burt Reynolds. Unless, of course, you think about Ned Beatty. And if you don't know what that means, you obviously haven't seen the movie.
Machines are going to fail. And the system's going to fail. And then what? Then survival. Who has the ability to survive? That's the game. Survive.
I don't think you understood me. I want to get some drivers to drive this car and that car down to Aintree. Drivers, you understand? You might get a driver, brothers. A driver, brothers. Where do they live? They live back over that way.
I'm lost.
But Reynolds said they don't review your career anymore. They review your life.